Hello, it's
Hello.
Sophia. It's Sophia from the Birth Neoterist space. We are in this week of, not week, month of talking about death. And I think I'm really super excited to talk about this. One, this kind of product, but also a lot of we already had some pre-talk before we started recording. So we're gonna put that all together. But I would love to introduce you to Sophia from Woven Farewell Coffins. And I would love Sophia, for you to introduce yourself in the ways that feel fit to you today. And then also to explain to us about Woven.
Sure. So, hello again. Um, my name is Sophia. I'm based in the UK, pronouns she, her, and I've been running my own willow coffin business for about 5 years. And I work directly with families. Families come and weave with me, maybe for like a couple of hours for the whole coffin. And I also have stock coffins that I supply to funeral directors with sort of quick response time and direct to families as well. And a really big focus of what I do is being really accessible and orientated around families, giving power to families and um, creating a very subtle kind of ritual, if you like. I don't really call it that with them directly because some people get put off by that word.
For sure.
But inviting them to bring a photo, really simple,
Mhm.
just like holding space. And then the second theme to what I'm really passionate about is sustainability. So we're one of the only coffin makers in the country to donate money to charity, to something called the Woodland Trust. So that kind of massive integration of life affirming, life supporting work and death work. You just can't disentangle them really. So and other aspects around sustainability. But so yeah, that's a little bit about what I do. And I'm so honored to be here.
So I have so many questions, right? Because okay, so in my in the last couple of years that I've been like focusing on death, I've been learning like different ways that, especially in the US, that you can get buried or disposed of, or however you want to name it, right? Like
Mm.
you can go you can have a green burial. You can have this. You can use water and things to like, it's just all this like wild, these options that like people don't know about because the funeral industry tells you like, you got to go get an expensive ass casket and you have to get this expensive ass thing. And for the longest time, like in my world, I've always been like, why am I dead and staying in the ground for thousands of years? I don't, I'm I'm exaggerating, but like, why am I staying in this box that like, I don't know. I just always had thoughts about that. So anyway, so I would
Yeah.
love for you to like explain like for the like coffins and things that you build and that sustainability, like can you explain like how
Mm.
you how things are made and why is it made that way? Like,
Sure.
yes.
Sure. So willow coffins, they're made with willow and timber. Most of the, if anyone's ever seen a willow coffin, because I think they're a lot less common in the US, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And normally have a plyboard at the bottom. But the coffins that we make at Woven Farewell have a woven base. So it's like a kind of a tray, a long woven tray. And then the sides of the coffin are actually fixed at a different stage. So the uprights come and twist round the edge of this tray, this kind of most of our coffins are flat at the foot end and round at the head end. So it's like this petal shape. Um, and and then so we've got these uprights and then kind of weave around the uprights. So it's a massive basket basically. And then the lid um, is another sort of very long flat tray with a cute plait around the edge. So there's lots of different kinds of willow that you can use. And it's really invigorating because the process of harvesting willow, because I'm just renting at the moment, so I don't have a willow bed myself. We buy it
Mm-hmm.
from Corner, but um, it's really supportive. So it's you cut it in a process called coppicing. So it's one tree that you cut at the base, and it sends up like 50 shoots just from one stump. And it's instead of like, so it grows like these tiny little sticks, right? And you just cut
Yeah.
all the, yeah, I don't know if you've heard of coppicing before, but it says it's an
Mhm.
alternative to like felling one big tree, which will never grow again. So from that point of view, it's
So it's
really,
helpful in the sense of like keeping trees alive.
yeah, definitely. And it supports a whole different kind of biodiversity, and the root structure stays in the ground for a long time. So it's really supportive of mycelium and these other things. So um it is actually most of the willow coffins in the world get made in China, and but there's a bit of a growth of more in the US. I think there's like 5 coffin weavers in the US now, and maybe 2
Hmm.
in Canada, and um yeah, and quite a few in the UK. So it's exciting times.
Yeah, it's
um
like one of the things too that I think people don't think about, is like, yes, we're alive, we come into the world, birth is a big thing, and then you live your life. But one, you never know where you're gonna go. That's number one, right? And that's just a reality, right? And that's like one of the things that like I don't like because I'm always talking about this. I'm like in my head, I'm like, I want to bring the awareness to people that like you can go at any time. I don't want you to be reckless because you might be here tomorrow. Right. But I also, you don't want to get too reckless because you might be here tomorrow and you might regret
yeah.
going too wild, right? But also at the same time, like you might not. So
Yeah.
there's like I think there is a like the way that we bring people into birth, right? We're like generally we're all like celebrating and we're like having all these things and like life is coming into the world. Like we have to think about like how do we want to go out,
Yeah.
right? And like also what does that say about the way that we lived?
Mm.
Right. And it's like what mattered to me in my life? Like was sustainability a thing? Was, like maybe not spending as much money a
Mm.
thing, right? Because like some people like dying is expensive.
It can be. People really make it expensive, but it doesn't have to be. I mean,
Yeah, so
depends like what access to resources you have, but I mean, it can be really shit ton expensive.
yeah, so it's like I think people like really have to think about how they want to leave this earth. And like one of the things that I learned with like the Going with Grace training was like,
Mm.
really, how do you want to leave this earth? How do you want to, where do you want to be buried? What do you want to be buried in?
Mm.
Like, what kind of ceremony do you want? Where do you want to be placed? Do you want to be at home?
Yeah.
Right? Like, do you want to be home and your willow coffin with your, with your beautiful material and your favorite outfit? Or do
Mm.
you want someone else to be like, well, let's just put you in the traditional way, even though that's not something that
Mm.
is something that you even want. So I guess I would love to just hear about like how do you, especially in this industry, like spread the word about like conscious death, I guess.
Mm. Well, a lot on social media, Instagram mostly, and a bit on Facebook and stuff. But through my locality, it's really important. I think where people have strong relationships, that's where the change can most easily be made, can't it? Where people have trust, and um, you know, that's a really important factor. But more and more I'm seeing people who are not normally that way inclined. They're not normally into sustainability or into talking about death because it's such a massive taboo, turning around and being like, actually, this is potent. Like, this is exciting because it's so hidden. And there are so many nuances within death and death positivity, or some people call that movement, um, that people can really get their fingers into. So yeah, I feel like I'm just part of a big wave, which is cool. As are you. You
I
just
mean,
kind
it's like it
of,
is. I feel like I'm like getting into the wave and like learning more, right? Like there's always more to learn. Like whether it's like literally where you want to be. Do you want to be in this kind of coffin? Or also like people's understanding of death and like me moving into like chaplaincy and spiritual direction is really a lot to do with how people, what is their relationship to death and like how does that relationship impact what they do in their living?
mm. So what drew you into chaplaincy rather than being a death doula? Because you mentioned going with race
Mhm.
training.
Yeah. So I call myself like a deaf practitioner, right? Like I really love deaf doula work. Like, and it really like it's one of the things that I have to be conscious of how much time I have for it because like I'm not necessarily a person who, because of my work, like I'm not a person that can do a lot of like bedside type of things. I'm just not home enough, literally, right? But this year, actually, last year and this year, when I was really starting to get into my deaf work, I had the honor of supporting one of my students that did the MAID process, so medical assistance in dying process. And it was just by happenstance that she reached out, Anna reached out to DADT. Me and her formed a relationship, and I like supported her through those things, right? And so she had a doula that was close by that was helping her to kind of navigate the legal side in this, because you know what the MAID process is like. You gotta get this okayed, and then it's this next step, and then it's this next step, right? Um, but also there's such a spiritual side of that as well, right? Like being able to assist Anna in her thinking out of like what does it mean for me to consciously die, right? To make a choice to die at the time that I feel is right for myself, right? Like, what does it mean for my family? What does it mean for my belief in heaven and hell, right? Like, what does it mean for these things? And so, moving through that with her, and I actually have a Substack interview with her. We did an interview before she passed away, just talking to her about because I was like, I don't want to talk about you after you die. I want you to tell your own story. Right? You know,
My
like,
God,
I want
that's
you to do your own
really,
thing. Like say your own thing. What was important to you? Tell us the points of your life that was important to you. What do you want people to know? Like, what do you want people to know about the made process, right? When you're in it. And so that was one of the big um moments for me of understanding that like as a birth doula, right? Like I was always there for like the actual like physical aspects of like we're gonna do this. I'm gonna hip squeeze you. We're gonna try to get this baby here. Like, you know, like we're gonna do these very physical things. And of course, there was like aspects, you know, people are grieving their emotions or whatever, but death was different, you know? Like
mm,
I, for me personally, I don't necessarily crave a crave, I want to say, like being there like when someone passes away, right? Like that's not necessarily my thing, but talking to someone around the spiritual aspects of what this means to them,
mm,
like talking through, hey, my family is upset with me and I have to die knowing this,
mm,
right? Like that to me, right? Like
yeah,
that to me is like I want to be there for that.
yeah,
And that I think really helped me to be like, I really want to go into like chaplaincy, spiritual direction, because like those conversations are sometimes they're missed, right?
mm,
Like people just aren't having the conversations because they don't really have anybody to have it with, you know, whatever case may be. But like those conversations are so essential to the process of dying.
mm, and
And
really
like,
to let go.
and it's, and I love being a witness to that. I love being a place to bounce ideas. Like, you know, me and Anna would have conversations and, you know, she would have her perspective and I would like give her more perspective, right?
Mm,
And hope and in hopes of mm, having her come to a point of acceptance about where she is, what she's doing, how she's doing it, and also how other people are required to show up for her,
mm, mm, mm,
right? Like this is her choice, right? But if people want to be active in it, they still need to show up for her. Right. So like, you know, that just like drove me into being like, nah, like there's something there.
mm,
Um, beyond what I know as a doula of being like hands-on, if that makes sense.
mm. It's,
Right. And plus also like I'm also chronically ill. So baby, I can't do hands-on all the time.
yeah,
My body don't work that way. So, you know, like,
both
yeah, that's
your
just where
passions.
it is.
I mean, it sounds kind of like a dying counseling, like a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
dying.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
Like I want to have those kind, and I've always been, you probably have been the same. Like I've always been the person that wants to have the conversation that other people are like, "Mm, I don't want to talk about that." And I'm like, why? Why not? Like, you don't want to talk about what you want to do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to talk about it? Why would we not talk about these hard conversations? Like, I
Yeah,
want to talk about it.
yeah, totally. I don't know if you've ever heard of the five love languages.
Hmm.
I think we're both one of our primary ones must be talking because I'm the
Yeah.
same. Like,
Listen, like me and my
there's
girlfriend,
no one of them.
I'm like, what? My first one is acts of service, right? Because I'm spoiled.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm spoiled. Spoil me, cook for me, do the things around the house for me, right?
Mm,
But and I've also learned too that because I used to just be like, oh, it's because I'm just spoiled. But it's also because I feel like my life work is always caring for others. So I do need a partner and people around me that will pour into me, right? So it's
mhm.
number one. Number two is quality time. But
Mm,
in that quality time, I want quality conversation.
mm, mm, mm,
I don't want no surface level conversation. I don't want no
mm.
like I'm
Yeah,
like, tell me the depths of your soul.
yeah.
You
And
know?
that really feeds into being a chaplain because it's the quality time and quality conversation together. That's really beautiful.
So what
Um,
do you see when you talk about like quality conversation? What does that mean to you and the work that you do? Because you're also talking about death all the time. You're also like, I don't think that you have to be a chaplain to do chaplaincy work.
no, I think for me, listening is a big part of quality conversation.
Hmm.
Something people often miss. You know, conversation normally equates to talking, right? But being listened to, like being chaplaincy, it's really key, and just being sensitive to the space that families need, and a lot of the time they want to share their stories, and the tears come, and a lot of the time the laughter comes, and you know, it's interesting when children are involved as well when they come along
Hmm.
to weave because there's a different kind of conversation. There's that facilitating
Hmm.
of an incredible potential for soul education for the children, and not necessarily being too graphic around the kids. Although that has its place as well. But
For sure.
you know, yeah, just that the sensitivity I think is really key. Um,
What are some things that like have like as you've gone into this work, and I think like you go into it and you kind of have
mm,
some idea of like people are gonna have feelings and I'm like like there's gonna be some grief involved and
mm,
whatever, but like are there any things that have surprised you like in your journey of doing this work? Like anything that you're like, I did not expect this thing either from myself
yeah.
or for the people that I care for.
Yeah. I didn't expect people I didn't expect people to be so sensitive about like not making a coffin until the person has died. Like I didn't expect that at all. And because for me it's like, okay, yeah, dying's happening, or like dying's gonna happen. Let's talk about the coffin. And that was like, wow, okay, I have to really become a bit more subtle
Yeah.
and with how I talk about coffins and that. But I think I had an experience that really surprised me, which was so about 3 months ago, a young man killed himself, and his brother came along to spend a week making his coffin with me, and his mum came too, and she quite elderly, and that really surprised me that she had. It was almost like sometimes when people are bereaved, it's like I've got to do this thing, like
Mhm.
this is I almost can't not do this thing, even
Yeah, for sure.
like she appeared to be quite a vulnerable person, and yeah, there are situations like that where I'm like, wow, you really have a lot of strength, and bereavement, especially child bereavement, like really draws that out sometimes. um
Yeah. Child
yes,
bereavement is different. Like losing a child, obviously, and even the other side, a child losing someone
yeah,
that's close to them. Like as a person who my dad was killed at 13, like it's a whole, and I think also that's what led me into this work as well, is like being a person, like, like being older. Like now I'm 34 and I can see. how that death impacted me during my 20s in ways that I
Mm.
wasn't necessarily aware of. But now in my 30s, I'm like, ooh, sis, you need to grieve. Like, ooh, you probably would have picked that partner if you had did some work on
Yeah.
yourself. You know what I'm saying? Um, that's like been a thing. But also, how long does it take to make a coffin?
It takes about 25 hours, 20 to 25 hours, depending on if it's a ply base or woven base. And yeah, I do it part time. I've got two little kids. Me and my husband's we've got two kids, so I sort of spend about 5 days making coffee. And when the kids were little, they used to be in a sling on my back, and I just take them with me, which is a cute sort of again an integration of like life and death. Just it's so
Yeah.
normal till the last 100 years. People that just, and in the West, it's still integrated a lot more in other places.
And
Children.
how the fuck do you make coffee? Like, I mean, I know there's the part at the bottom. Okay. It's the pieces of the willow. Okay. Like, are you literally like weaving? Like what?
Yeah. Okay. So the base and the lid, they're pretty similar processes, and you have I have like 5 or 7 uprights. There we go. For those
Hmm.
who are just listening, I've got my fingers, 7 fingers up. There we go. And then and you just weave in and out, back and forth, up and up and up, a 6 foot height. That is the basics of the lid and the base. And then on the side, there is, so you fix the uprights with a process called scalloping, where with a rod of willow, you take a foot off the bottom, half of the rod widthwise off the bottom, so it's a lot more pliable. If you think,
Hmm.
just stick in half lengthways. Um, and then curl each piece around the edge of the base, like I said before. I mean, I can send some pictures over or somehow share it with you.
Yeah.
It's a very visual thing. And then there are 3 different weaves on the side. There's something called whaling. So these are all basketry terms. It's just making
Hmm.
basically. Um, um, yeah, the whaling is a kind of a strengthening weave. That's the first one that happens to make sure that all the uprights are vertical, well spaced between each other, and like you're looking along the long edge of the coffin, that it's all kind
Hmm.
of in line with each other. Um, and then you've got your English rounding, and you've got your French rounding, and then we put I use hemp rope for the handles. So all these really cool, different, very old basketry skills,
Hmm.
um, and it's very physical. Like my hands hurt after,
Yeah, because
after,
that's not like you're bending wood. Like you're
yeah,
bending, it's not like you have like a soft cloth and you're like, what to do? Like it's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. No, okay,
there's manipulation involved.
yeah. So you've got to soak the willow. If it's dried, you've got to soak the willow, and that makes it pliable. So soaking it for like a week, if it's got its bark on, or if the bark is stripped off, like most willow coffins are woven with the bark stripped off, because it only takes a couple of hours to soak. You can do it on a industrial commercial scale a lot more easily like that.
Hmm.
So that is the thing that I forgot to say at the beginning. I wouldn't
Even
try it
still,
without.
like it's still like I mean I can imagine that like soaked willow obviously maybe has some softness to it, but it still ain't bending like a piece of paper. Like it's not like
Uh,
it's still not that soft.
no.
So I have 2 more questions for you before we exit our time today. So my first question is, when you're thinking about the work that you do, right, and specifically like the coffins and things that you are literally making,
Mm.
um, what would you like the future of that to be? Like, would you like more access to the skill set? Would you like more people to be able to build what you're
Mm.
building? Like, what do you want to see in the future?
You know what, Sabia? I would really like to see rental willow coffins a lot more. because they are a lot more economically accessible for people. There's a lot of funeral poverty now. And my willow coffins in the UK, they're between sort of £700 and £800, which I think is like 500 to $600.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? But
Way cheaper than what we have going on over here. Yeah.
it's cheaper, but it's still $500 or $600 too much for people.
Mm-hmm.
Rental coffins, they are more common in the US, but there's no willow rental coffins. And I think there's just, if that became mainstream, I would be so happy. Like it would kind of do me out of a job a bit. But also,
Mm-hmm.
if it's done in a hygienic and clean and still beautiful way, then it can mean that people can have access to a coffin for like, $100 rather than, I think, some willow coffins go for $1,500 in the US. And,
Mm-hmm.
that is maybe a reflection of like the pricing, the funeral sector pricing in the US. It's so inflated.
Oof.
Probably.
Child, we having a whole nother conversation about that. Because that's one of the things that I was like, do I need to become a funeral director? Because these things
Yeah,
are,
you'd be
it's
an
fucking
amazing.
terrible.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, bro, like, oh my
yeah,
God, we can get, that's a whole nother discussion. But it's
yeah,
like really, yeah, I'm gonna have to have a conversation. Like the funeral industry in the US is so inflated. It
yeah,
should not cost people this much to die
yeah,
at all. Like what, why do people have to go in debt
yeah.
to bury you?
I
Like
know.
to like what? You're huh?
Yeah, and
It's wild.
it's just it's so capitalistic. I mean, it is any like most places in the world, but that how it could just maybe it's like less regulation or
Hmm.
just grown and grown and grown and grown.
It's a
Anyway,
fucking
what
mess.
is your
That's also one of the things that when I got into like really learning specifically about the deaf industry, that I was like livid about. Because I've like I said, I've grown up around a lot of deaf, like we talked about before. And like funerals are a thing. Like no one should still be paying on your funeral years later. I just don't think that that's a thing, bro. Like I just can't accept that as a thing. You know what I mean? Anywho's use, because I'll get on my pedestal.
take your
But the
time.
last question I have for you is with the work that you do, right? Holding space, literally, physically making coffins, like how are you taking care of yourself?
I love that question. I love hearing all the different people's answers that you interview as well. It's so wonderful that you give space for that. And I'm really into Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but it really helps me to stay sane, Buddhist thinking.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you have it in other spiritual practices as well, but what really helps me is to become aware that my anxiety or my fear or all these things are not me, and to kindly unhook and step aside. And yeah, that really helps me. That's a big part in meditation. But I also, yeah, just having a kind lens on myself. And it's easy in this world when there's so much happening, there's so much shit going down. There's
Hmm.
a lot of pressure to be, with social media now, to just like be amazing all the time. And like actually we're just all beautiful humans living our lives.
Like literally trying our best.
It's so
Like
how
literally
about
trying our
you?
best.
Can I
Um,
reverse the question?
right now, I've been like doing less, period.
Amazing.
And I'm currently like in the phases of planning a sabbatical.
Wow.
So I am like I really, I've been on go since 2018. And
Yeah.
so I need to sit my ass down for lack of better words.
Yeah.
So planning that and then also even with that, like in that sabbatical, really wanting to make intentional plans around how do I come back and how do I come back in a way
Mm,
that isn't like, oh, now I'm just gonna go from 0 to 100, right?
mm,
But really like learn the lessons of like what did my body need? Like what do I need mentally? How do I integrate that into just my daily way of existing?
mm,
Um, instead of being like, I'm gonna do 150% and then go to zero because I need to recover. You know what I mean? Like I
Mm,
need to be somewhere in like that 75% on a daily basis.
mm,
So figuring that out
that's exciting. Oh,
for
wow.
sure. So how do we reach you?
So I'm on Instagram. I've got a small team of lovely people. So we are Woven Farewell Coffins on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Got a website, wovenfarewell.co.uk.
Yes. And what part of the UK do you live in?
The Southwest in Devon. Yeah.
Because I'm like, do I need to come out there and learn how to make a damn coffin?
Yeah. Totally. That I would be so honored. That would be brilliant.
I'm
Please.
like, well, do I need to come out there and make a damn coffin? Because like, what?
Yeah, you definitely
That
should.
sounds like some like not like I don't know, something's like ancestral about making a fucking coffin by hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? Like something about that is such a like a completion thing. And like I know I'm supposed to be ending the episode, but like one of the things that also that has like stuck around in my thinking around when we talk about death is like traditionally our families, cultures, whatever, they really saw us out to the end. We stayed at home and we died.
Mhm.
Our body was there until we did whatever we did next. Like the family cleaned you up.
Mm,
It was such like it was like we got to see like the whole process
mm,
where, right now most people die in a hospital, right? And like you don't see death, you just like see, after someone has cleaned up the body and has done this and has done that. So some of us we're not even like mentally we're not seeing the completion, and I think
mm,
that's part of grief is
mm.
to like see the whole process, if that makes sense.
Do you have direct cremations in the US yet?
Do I have what?
Direct cremations, are they a thing in the US yet?
I don't know yet. I don't know, I have to look that up.
That there's this new thing in the UK where families don't attend at the crematorium. It's like a cheaper way of doing it, but it's
Hmm.
really controversial because yeah, like you say, it's so important for grieving to be part of the process. But and this is like another way of removing that integration. So yeah, watch out for that one. That
Yeah.
makes a funeral
we
home near
we
you.
we obviously have more to talk about, but I appreciate your time, your energy. Like I have your website, but of course, send us over anything else that you would like our audience to know or be aware of. Because I think part of the death work that you're talking about is also like these aspects of death activism around
Mm,
sustainability and access and what is a good death and how do we like how do we greet like that is also death activism, and that's something that of course being an activist that I am, I'm like let's do it. So
yeah.
so yeah, so like whatever resources you have, like or want to share with us, please do so. Because for some of the audience is gonna be like, I never even thought this deeply into not only like yes, there's death or like what happens in your life in the field, but like death as like an event, right? Just like birth is an event. And we
Mm,
try to improve things in birth so that people can have a better birth experience, but also want people to have a better death experience.
hopefully. Yeah, it's your last kind of act but in the world, isn't it? If you're
Hmm. One thing about all of us, we're gonna be born and we all gonna die. What
yeah.
happens in between? We don't know. We don't know. We
Have
don't
some
know. But we
fun.
gonna die.
Yeah.
It just is what it is.
No, it's a love,
But
babe. So nice to talk with you.
for sure. Thank you so much.